The United States killed Iran's top general Qasem Soleimani in an airstrike on the Baghdad's international airport, racketing up the U.S.-Iran tensions and complicating the Middle East situation. The order came directly from U.S. President Donald Trump following the attack by Iran-backed militia on the U.S. embassy in Baghdad earlier this week. The targeted killing echoes President Trump's threat on Twitter that the Iranian government would pay a very big price for the embassy attack. And Iran's top leader quickly responds to the killing and vows severe revenge. Will U.S.-Iran tensions continue to mount and eventually lead to full-blown armed conflict? As the Iraqi government has condemned both the embassy riot and the U.S. airstrikes, how will Iraq balance its ties with both of its allies? And can Donald Trump honor his campaign promise to end endless wars overseas? To discuss these issues more, I'm very happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Professor Wang Jin from Northwest University of China. We'll also talk via satellite to Gamba Nadari, columnist with Kayhan International in Tehran. We'll also speak to Richard Wise, a security expert at the Wikistrat Global Consultancy, via Skype. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to Dialogue. Mr. Wang, what will be the consequences?
Well, I think it's very difficult to predict, precisely, but I think the consequences will be very, very challenging ahead because the killing of Soleimani, Qasem Soleimani, is a very, very influential figure, not only inside Iran, but also in the whole Middle East. And he is the commander of Iranian Revolution Guards Corps, overseas faction and Al-Quds faction, and which means that he led all this kind of the military operations overseas, especially in the Middle East. And also he is perceived as the very, very possible successor, according to some analysis, that he might be the future successor of the supreme leader inside Iran. So United States killing of Qasem Soleimani should be perceived as a kind of the declaration of war, in my personal opinion, towards Iran. So that depends on, in the future, that depends on how Iran will react. But nothing for sure. But I think one thing is certain, that this killing is very, very serious challenge to the Iran's sovereignty and Iran's reputation in the international society and also in the whole Middle East region.
Let me go to our Iranian guest speaker who's standing by in Tehran and get his thoughts and comments on the geopolitical fallout that has been triggered by the recent killing of a very senior Iranian general. Hi, Mr. Nadare Gamba, what do you think of the consequences?
Well, we have just entered an uncharted territory, which is going to escalate the already dangerous situation, not just in Iraq, but throughout the Middle East and even beyond. This is going to play very well into the hands of extremists, hardliners and conservatives in Iran. We know that Trump is doing the same thing. He is desperate to distract the attention from the ongoing impeachment process against him in the United States. So some kind of mini conflict in the region is going to serve his interests and is going to lift some kind of pressure off his shoulders. The same thing is happening here. The hardliners want to win the parliamentary and the presidential elections in the months ahead. So why not escalate the current conflict with the United States? I think we need some other countries, some other stakeholders to step in and stop us from escalating this unnecessary conflict in the region.
Nadari, you have given us a very convincing analysis about the background and the reasons behind the killing of General Soleimani. But what would be the worst-case scenario, and do you foresee any endgame?
Ian Ray, I was outside in the streets today. Millions of people have taken to the streets. They are calling on the government, on their leader, to retaliate against this foolish attack by the U.S. Army against a top Iranian commander. This commander was pretty much celebrated in Iran and across the region because he led the ongoing war against terrorism and extremism, especially Daesh and Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria, with very, very major successes. So it is a huge blow to Iran. They have already vowed to retaliate. They need to do something about this, otherwise they are going to undermine their own credibility in Iran. So I'm afraid, Yanrei, it is going to escalate the current situation. We are going to see some kind of confrontation, and I'm afraid many people are going to lose their lives if this really happens in the coming weeks, if not months or years. We need, as I told you, some cool heads in Iran and in the United States to come to their senses and act like two adults and realize that this is a lose-lose situation for both of them. Nobody is going to win this new conflict.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wang, almost exactly 4 decades ago, we had the Iran Revolution that led to the comprehensive sanctions against Tehran. The bilateral relationship between Washington and Tehran has dropped to the lowest nadir ever since. The economy in Iran declined sharply. It's still wrestling with the very idea of survival, despite the sufficient supply of oil. Now, what do you think will be the response from the regional rivals of Iran, from Saudi Arabia and other members of the GCC? Secretary Pompeo called his counterparts in these countries, like Saudi Arabia, United Kingdom of Emirates, and so on. What message did he deliver to his counterparts?
I think the United States needs to do right now to show that they will stand firmly with his Middle East allies, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and also including Israel. Because I think for these states, yes, they should be happy because Soleimani, for them, is a very, very major threat because Soleimani led a very network in the Middle East that targeting not only Saudi Arabia but also UAE and also Israel. So for these states, United States allies in the Middle East, they should be okay, we should be happy. But actually, I think they know exactly what will happen because this is not the end of the war. This is actually to provoke the new round of confrontation, and United States is far away. Their territory is far away. Yes, they have the military bases here, they have the individuals here, but we have to know that Saudi Arabia, they are very nearby states of Iran, and UAE is also the nearby state of Iran. And also we see that Israel is nearby state of Syria, where a lot of the Iran-backed military forces there. So they might become the first wave of targets of Iran to revenge. And if this kind of revenge started, that might be, I totally agree with my Iranian colleague, that it might totally escalate it into a very major confrontation in this region that threatens everyone.
There's no doubt about the haunting specter of having a comprehensive confrontation between Washington and Tehran. However, it's going to be some kind of a asymmetrical war, given the far weaker military of Iran, the Persian state. Now I'm joined by Ahmed Rushdie, president of the House of Iraqi Expertise Foundation, via telephone. Hello.
Hi, hello, sir.
What do you make of the current escalation of tensions between Iran, Iraq on one side and Washington on the other?
Well, actually, what's happened in those 2 days made so many problems for the resigned government and for the Prime Minister himself. So the response was very weak from the Prime Minister, and he actually pushed the ball toward the Parliament to have an immediate session, and it is accepted that tomorrow, Saturday, there will be an immediate session for the Parliament, headed by the deputy, not the speaker, the deputy of the speaker, talking about how we're going to manage the presence of the American forces in Iraq. But I don't think it will reach to some sort of a decision, some sort of a law about getting rid of the American forces. It's still, because there are so many conflict issues will be discussed tomorrow. And also the most important thing is that maybe Iraq now is looking for a new prime minister with a new government. So that's why even the president, he condemned the attack, but at the same time he said, we must control ourselves, we must control everything. We cannot make Iraq's future jeopardized because of what's happening. So I think in this 24 hours there will be so many talks between the political blocs about try to calm down what's happening, try to manage Iraq in a way that it will be a balanced area, try to manage Iraq as an area of mediation, to talk between the Americans and the Iranians on the Iraqi soil rather than to fight each other on the Iraqi soil.
Obviously, the Iraqi government is a Shiite majority, and Iran has, since the ouster of Saddam Hussein, exercised enormous political influence on the Iraqi government for an apparent reason, such as the prominent figure of Nada. I wonder if my pronunciation of his name is correct, but he is the most influential spiritual leader of Shiites in Iraq. What will he do in response to the killing of General Soleimani? And do you think similar reactions will be caused in a place like Lebanon, where Hezbollah is obviously the proxy of Tehran?
Well, you know, Iraq has so many problems. The most important problems that he has now, more economically and on a security basis and economically basis, which means that we need the U.S., we need the international community to stay in Iraq and to save Iraq. This is one hand. And the other hand is that even if the Shia majority government would be present inside the majority inside the parliament and so on, there are talks. I'm hearing talks from the MPs, from the Shia MPs, is that we cannot go further in the escalation. We must try to calm down things, which means that the Iraqi politicians understand well the consequences of the conflict between Iran and the U.S. on the Iraq soil.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wang. I was told that American nationals are being called upon by the Trump administration to come back and go back to the United States. What do you think of the evacuation of American nationals from Iraq? Do you think Iraq is likely to be turned into a war zone?
That's because I think that Donald Trump made the decision due to his fear or his worry that the United States civilians and United States individuals might become the targets in the future of some of the pro-Iran military and political factions inside Iraq. So that is why I think he made the decision. But this process should be very difficult. So that is why, I mean, I feel some kind of the puzzle, because if the United States really want to target Soleimani himself, he should know that they should know the very consequences that will lead to the threats of the United States civilians and citizens inside Iraq. So they should do it earlier. But these steps were taken by the United States government after this kind of the suicide, this kind of a killing against the Soleimani. So that's, I think this is why I feel some kind of the puzzle. That's why he did it so late.
In fact, many international observers have been caught unprepared by the order that came directly from President Trump to kill General Soleimani. At this defining moment when the White House is seriously considering massive evacuation and military drawdown of American troops, not only in Syria, but above all in Afghanistan. And despite the departure of John Bolton, former National Security Advisor, most famous hawk in the Trump administration, this killing happened that has triggered rapid escalation of tensions in the Middle East. Now let me go to Richard White. What do you think of reasons behind the Trump administration's decision to go ahead and kill this influential military figure in the Iran Revolutionary Guard?
I would describe them as tactical, operational, and strategic considerations. So tactically, this was a very easy target in the sense that for some reason they all decided to travel in the same cars in an isolated road where there weren't any civilians, so it was almost an invitation to be attacked. Apparently, the Americans had intelligence about the location, the cars and so on, either from the Iraqis or other sources. So tactically, it was an easy decision. Operationally, we've seen a lot of setbacks for the U.S. in Iraq in recent months. There have been a number of these attacks by the the Iranian-backed Iraqi militia against U.S. forces. We saw the embassy attack and so on. And as well in other parts of the region, you've seen some backing down by President Trump about when the Iranians, for example, shot down the U.S. drone. So it was a good time to reverse this narrative of the U.S. as a paper tiger and show that the U.S. will use force when necessary. And then strategically, President Trump is known for taking these high-risk, potentially high-payoff decisions. So we saw him go to meet with the head of North Korea, despite people's advice not to do that. He left the Iran nuclear deal. He left the climate deal. So he likes to take these very bold decisions that are very risky, but if they succeed, could result in a high payoff for the U.S.
Thank you very much, Richard. I'll go back to you in a while, but let me go back to Mr. Ahmed Rushdi, President of the House of Iraqi Expertise Foundation, who's on the phone. Hello. Hello, Mr. Rushdi.
Hi, how are you, sir?
What do you think of the worst-case scenario? Now, exactly 4 decades ago, there was the Iran Islamic Revolution that led to the severing of the diplomatic ties between Washington and Tehran. Do you believe that there's strong likelihood that diplomatic relations could be endangered seriously as a result of the embassy attack? You know, embassy, that's a very sensitive word in the vocabulary of American diplomacy since 1979, exactly 40 years ago. What would be the worst-case scenario?
Well, I'm thinking about another scenario, the scenario of 2003, of what's happening in Iraq. And the days before the war, the year before the war, or 2 years before the war, how it escalated also between Iraq and the U.S., and also only the U.S. and UK made a decision about attacking Iraq, in spite of the UN does not have any, they didn't manage to make any decision about that. It looks like we are on this environment. Is that it's still the U.S. maybe with the support of the UK, with the support of the Israelis, it's now being confirmed is that this alignment is going to escalate things, and also with the support of the Saudis and the Emirates and the Gulf countries. So I think the way it's managing in Iran and the U.S. is more escalating issues, and it won't be for the benefit of the whole area. As an Iraqi, I'm seeing things going escalated, just what's happened in 2003, just I said. But I hope it's just one of the countries, or let's say the UN, the international organization, the international community should play a role about calming things, to try to de-escalate what's happening now. Let us not forget is that 16 years it was a very bad image in Iraq. It destructurized the whole state, and that's why we all seeing the demonstrations began in the 1st of October, and it's not ended until now. So we all know that those escalating things will not help Iraq, and it will not help Iran also in a way or another.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roshdi, President of the House of Expertise, Iraqi Expertise Foundation. He is interviewed on the phone. Let me go back to Gamba Nadare, the Iranian expert. Hello. As you may have heard, that I asked a question about the Islamic Revolution that took place in 1979, 40 years ago, and that led to the suspending of diplomatic ties between Washington and the Tehran. Now, tell me very quickly, are you going to repeat the same tragedy? American embassy is being stormed by radicals in Iraq, and Americans have good reasons to believe these radicals are supported by Iran, hence the killing of your senior general. Do you think there will be a similar nightmare for both sides, Washington and Tehran?
Well, Ian, both the governments in Iran and the United States have made many mistakes, and I'm afraid they are going to continue and make similar mistakes, not today, not tomorrow, but for many years to come, because they are not perfect individuals, and they know very well that they are only trying to serve their own interests, both politicians in Iran and the United States. As I told you earlier, we need other countries, other stakeholders to step in and help us to stop further escalating the current situation.
Okay,
This
let me
is
ask you one
unnecessary.
follow-up
The region has had
question,
enough.
Mr. Gamba Nadari. Recently, a joint military maneuver was held between Russians, Chinese, and the Iranians in nearby waters of well, the Mediterranean. I forget. It's probably very close to the Hormuz Strait. But what do you make of the message that the two governments deliver to the rest of the world, particularly to Americans, when tensions are mounting between Tehran and Washington? Do you think Russians will take side? And what do you think of the immediate response from the Chinese spokesperson?
Well, we do expect the Chinese government and the Russian government to help us somehow start a new dialogue with the United States. We shouldn't escalate this current situation. The military drills in the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean were held to send a clear message to the international community that the allied forces of Iran, Russia, and China are now more than ever determined to ensure regional peace, security, and order and balance in this volatile region. I hope that the Iranian government is not going to give another excuse for the United States to send hundreds of thousands of occupying forces to this particular region again, because this is not what we want. This is not our allies, Russia and China want. They want peace and security and protection for international trade and the real war on terrorism and extremism. So I think the Iranian government, the leadership, have to come to their senses. They need to listen to the Russian and Chinese counterparts and realize that nobody welcomes confrontation and escalation in this volatile region. And for that to happen, the president of Iran 2 days ago made it absolutely clear that Iran is more than willing and welcomes dialogue with the United States as long as the U.S. returns to the nuclear deal and lifts its illegal sanctions on Iran. Iran doesn't expect more than that. Iran doesn't expect a lot of things. If this happens, I don't see any reason why Iran is going to escalate the current situation. Let us cross our fingers and hope that Russia, China, and also the European Union will come to our help and will also talk some kind of sense into the Iranian officials and the American officials that confrontation is not the way forward. We have had enough blood pressure, blood loss, and bloodshed in this particular region. We need dialogue, we need security, and we need collective regional order and security, not just for the region, but for other countries across the...
We understand your anxiety, and we also understand the common energy stakes that we share with our partners in the Middle East. Having said this, China is not an ally of any of the international players, such as Russia or Iran. You said we are the allied forces. That's not correct, by the way. Let me go back to Richard White.
Allies for peace. Yan. Allies for peace. For peace. Peace.
That's the code name of the military exercise. Thank you very much for correcting my mistake. Let me go back to Richard. 4 decades ago, we had the Islamic Revolution. Do you think President Trump deliberately used the embassy attack as a bargaining chip to arouse sentiments that may persuade the swing votes to support him in the next election? An election that we're going to have 1 year from now, in the year, I mean, less than 1 year, there will be yet another election to decide who will be in the White House. So what do you think of the factor of domestic politics at this defining moment, Richard?
Yeah, the thing is, there's no good answer, even if he were trying to manipulate the elections through foreign policy, which there's no evidence that's the case in this crisis. So on the one hand, he stood out as a presidential candidate for calling for a reduction of foreign U.S. military operations, an end to these endless wars, as some of his partisans put it. So disengaging from Iraq, avoiding conflicts with Iran would support that group of people and make them happy. But taking a soft stance also made him vulnerable to those who claimed he was a paper tiger and not being ineffective in his leadership. By taking a stronger stance, by using military force, he can show that he's a very strong leader. But now he's being criticized by many, particularly in the Democratic Party, for taking risky actions that put America at risk, for acting without congressional approval, and so on.
Let me ask you, Richard, let me ask you a broad
Yeah.
question concerning the military presence of American government in many parts of the world, such as in Afghanistan, in Syria. President Trump, you know, it's not a secret any longer who wants, I mean, President Trump really wants to withdraw American troops to have a serious military drawdown in Afghanistan and to put an end to the combat operations in Syria, a war-torn country in the Middle East. But why did he call off negotiations with the moderates of Taliban in Camp David? And why did Secretary of Defense Esper decide to send in more American soldiers perhaps to Iraq to assist with your military presence there? Won't that go against the initial decision and, you know, considerations of President Trump, who shows no interest whatsoever in promoting American military adventures? That's one of the reasons why John Holden was fired.
Yes, I mean, President Trump, though, is balancing these considerations. So his inclination, as you said, is to cut back on these foreign military operations. He thinks they waste a lot of American lives and money. But in what he can reverse his decision, at least for a while, when pressed to do so by Congress, by foreign allies, by people in his administration. So the Taliban peace initiative was stalled because the Taliban chose to attack U.S. personnel in Afghanistan at the moment when he was planning to open a dialogue with them in the United States. So it forced his hand to call it off. Similarly, here we see that the President Trump says he would like to negotiate with the Iranians, but we see the Iranians taking advantage of this and shooting down U.S. drones, attacking U.S. personnel, and so on. But in the case of Syria, when he has become comfortable with a reduced U.S. presence, when he thinks the Turks can fill a gap, he will go ahead and make these reductions. So he balances these considerations, what his heart tells him he wants to do, which is reduce these commitments, and what his brain tells him to do, which is not to, undermine U.S. foreign policy.
Thank you very much, Richard.
So
Thank you so much, Mr. Wang. Before we conclude this discussion, what do you think of the response from the Chinese authorities?
I think Chinese authorities response is very in time. It's also very constructive. We hope that everybody to calm down to solve this kind of disputes through the dialogue, through negotiation. So the peace should be the final aim for everyone, because if fight everyone, nobody is safe. But if everyone come back to calm down and sit and talk, so any kind of the problem might be solved. So I think this is why the Chinese government called everybody to calm down, and they encourage the kind of the negotiation and the peace talks in the future.
But the major problem that is emerging very quickly on the horizon is what's going to happen to European multinationals who insisted that their business relationship with Iran should not be compromised, no matter what. That's a serious test of the alliance across the Atlantic Ocean as a result of the recent escalation of tensions in the Middle East. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.